A potentially seismic moment in British politics. Nigel Farage's Reform UK wreaks havoc on both the left and the right.
It marks the end of two-party politics as we've known it for over a century in this country.
His party started with a by-election win from Labour on a whisker of 6 votes in Runcorn.
The message I take out of these results is that we need to go further and faster.
Then a rout of Conservative seats, leaving the Tories with not a single council it was defending last night.
Protest parties are doing well today. I know that. It is disappointing.
All down to a howl from the electorate, which the big parties can no longer ignore.
Conservative and Labour, they give it loads of this. They do nothing.
The position Labour finds itself in 10 months after a massive landslide in 2024 is historically unprecedented. Now, it's worth saying that Labour started in 2024 from a relatively low base. 33.7% of the vote is the lowest percentage of the vote that's ever produced a parliamentary majority for the winning party, never mind a landslide. And yet, despite this, despite starting from a low base, support in the country for the Labour Party and the popularity of Keir Starmer have collapsed. Labour's polling average today is just 24%. Now, this has created space for Reform UK and Nigel Farage to benefit, as demonstrated by the local council elections that we've just seen. Now, in those elections, Reform took 667 council seats, 10 councils and 2 mayoralties. In this video, I explain quite what's going on for the Labour Party, how it happened and what Labour need to do about it. The fact that Labour came to power at the last election with such a small percentage of the vote, the lowest ever to produce a parliamentary majority, never mind a landslide, means that Starmer and the Labour Party were not particularly popular at the last election. In fact, they only came to power because of an anti-Tory sentiment within the country and because the first-past-the-post system rewards the party with the largest level of support in the country with an overwhelming majority. That's what it's designed to do. You'd expect, usually, that a new government would experience a honeymoon period upon taking office, but things got a lot worse for Labour and Starmer as they went on to experience the most rapid decline in popular support any newly elected government in the UK has ever experienced. The only reasonably close comparison is the decline in support for the Conservative Party under Thatcher following the 1979 election. But they were starting from a much stronger position and bottomed out at about 28% of the vote before recovering. Currently, polling puts Labour on about 24% of the vote, and if there was an election today, it's likely that Labour would lose hundreds of seats in what would likely be their worst result since 1935 in terms of seats won, and since 1918 in terms of the percentage of the vote. In other words, if current polling is accurate, barring a turnaround in the polling, Labour are potentially facing an historic wipeout at the next election. Now, of course, a lot can happen between now and then, but Labour need to turn it around. So, what exactly went wrong to put Labour in this position? And is it even possible at this stage to turn things around? Now, let's start with what the Labour Party themselves would say. What exactly is their strategy? Well, they would say they came to power by offering reassurance and offering to run the country in a better way than the Conservatives had done previously. In other words, the reason Labour were elected was, yes, on a mandate of change, but also on a mandate of security, on a mandate of competence. And I guess what Labour would say at the moment is that they just haven't had long enough. They've only been in power for 10 months, and the business of change takes a long time. So what they will be hoping for is that the work that they've been doing will start to bear fruit, that people will start to benefit from the changes that they make, and that will allow the Labour Party to go on to secure a victory at the next election. After all, if polling stays like it is, in other words, if polling stays in a position where 3 of the parties have over 20% support in the country, it will only take a party to get just above 30% for them to win an overall majority. That's the reason why I think Reform can do it, by the way, but it's also potentially an argument for Labour being able to hang on with their existing strategy, start to make improvements in people's lives, and go on to win the next election. Not with a very convincing mandate, but as I've just said, they didn't win a particularly convincing mandate last time. So I think the alternative narrative that I want to put forward is that there's something fundamentally wrong with Labour's approach politically at the moment. They started out by offering very little. So they offered change, but that change was very ill-defined, and it was really quite a modest programme that they put before the electorate. And many people were hoping that Labour would come to power and that they would pivot in office towards a more radical programme. And in fact, what's happened, at least in terms of the most prominent policies that people have fixated on, like the winter fuel changes, refusing to reverse the two-child benefit cut, and the changes made to personal independence payment, well, actually, they've reinforced a narrative in people's minds that the Labour Party are no longer the party for working people. In fact, the Labour Party seem to be doing things that the Tory party would have done. Now, this is particularly unhelpful in an environment where people are fed up of the establishment parties, because it reinforces a narrative that all of the mainstream parties are the same, and therefore it creates a lot of political space for an alternative. And the appeal of that alternative is that that alternative is able to say, we're not like the rest of them. And when we say change, we really mean it. We're going to take the country in a different direction. Now, my view is that it is actually too late for the Labour Party to change course. I think if you look at previous examples of polling collapsing in quite this way, so you might look at what happened to John Major in 1992 after Black Wednesday, what happened to the Conservative Party more recently after Liz Truss. When you see these really big declines in support, it really is quite difficult for a party without a change in leadership to recover that support in the country, because the impression in people's minds of that party, of that leader, get entrenched, and it then becomes quite difficult for people to change their mind. And I think the impression that people have of Starmer is that he's not authentic. After all, he became Labour leader by presenting a very different programme to the public, and people have noticed that he's changed. He's changed his whole ideology insofar as he has one. So I think people's perceptions of Starmer are pretty negative, and actually people believe, I think fairly, that he can't be trusted. So I guess my view is this. It's unlikely Starmer goes anytime soon, but I don't think it's that unlikely that after the next set of local elections, where you see Reform winning in Wales, doing well in Scotland, making further gains in council seats across the country, Starmer's position, if the polling doesn't recover, starts to look very tenuous, because I think Labour MPs at that point will start to worry about their seats, and you might start to see people plotting to replace Starmer. Now, I actually think that would be good for the party and good for the country, and it might be the only way, in my view, that Labour have a chance of recovery. Say if they could bring in a soft left figure. I think Andy Burnham is the best that they have, but he doesn't have a seat in Parliament at present. If you could bring in someone like that, then there's a benefit for Labour in that they could position themselves on the left with somebody with the political skill that the Labour Party would need to win back people that Labour have lost on the left, but also reach out beyond that to the broader base of support that Labour's going to need in the country. So I think that's probably the best way of Labour recovering. However, what if Starmer wants to stay in power? Let's say that I could replace Morgan McSweeney in number 10 Downing Street and give a bit of advice. Well, I think what I'd say to Starmer is the first thing you need to do is sack Rachel Reeves, make her responsible for the unpopular economic decisions that have been taken, and you need to reverse all of those decisions and apologise to the British public. The next thing that he needs to do is set out a clear vision for the future and give a little bit of substance to this idea of change. What exactly is going to change about people's lives under a Labour government? And how is that going to happen? Because really that narrative, that political narrative, just isn't there at the moment. It's not clear to people the difference Labour government will make. And actually the clarity that they have is that actually in many ways Labour are making people's lives worse with some of the policies they've introduced. And thirdly, to make it really clear that Starmer's leadership has gone in a different direction, I'd do something bold. Now that could be a one-off wealth tax to bring in lots of money to fund some needed changes. It could be nationalising something like water. It doesn't really matter what it is, but I think something bold needs to happen to say to voters across the country, government can do things, we're willing to do them, and the Labour Party have changed. And I really think if Starmer doesn't get the message quickly, that his government is unpopular and that he personally is unpopular and that is opening the door up to Farage, that it is likely that we're going to be facing a Nigel Farage government at the next election. Now, perhaps I'm being too pessimistic. As I've said, a lot can happen between now and then, but that is my worry. And look, I've been predicting this for a very long time. If you look at my video that I did just after the election happened, I said as much. So that's my warning. It was my warning then, and it remains my warning. And I'll finish by showing you that clip to show just how consistent I've been on this. For now, goodbye, best wishes. I'm seriously worried that a Labour government that fails to address people's real material concerns will open the door to populists on the right. And let's be clear about what that means. Farage parades as a champion of the people, but his agenda is the same as that of Liz Truss. He's an extreme Thatcherite, who would implement policies that are the opposite of what those who might vote for him badly need. But his popularity is growing precisely because he is seen by many as someone who says it how it is, and who flies in the face of establishment opinion, even though, of course, Farage comes from an establishment background himself and would represent their interests in Parliament by advocating for policies such as cutting their taxes and privatising services such as the National Health Service, which the rest of us badly need.